Amanda King is a program associate for the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program. She supports public and private convenience centered on advancing and informing policies for multi-sector approaches at the intersection of environment, health, and security. Ms. King communicates program activities through digital platform mediums and contributes to program research, analysis, and communications, including authoring articles and serving as assistant director for the award-winning blog New Security Beat. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge and experiences with us, Ms. King.
Yes, of course. I'm really happy to be here. And I mention it, but I'm from Peoria, so if there's other Illinois any activists, I'm from the state, so hello. And that's where I'm joining from today. So it's nice to be with you all.
Yeah. I'm a Chicago native, but I'm in DC right now, but I'll be returning.
We're switched.
Yeah, exactly. So, oh, and to, everyone, you know, we will be having a Q&A session after the presentation and PowerPoint. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, and then we can address the questions after the presentation. So.
Great. Well, it's great to be with you all, and thank you, Jacopo, for the introduction and for sharing the slides and everything. I'm really looking forward to discussing environmental peace building with you all, and I hope that what we talk about today is of interest or helps or informs your work or general curiosities. So my name, as Jacopo says, is Amanda King, and I work at the Wilson Center, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. And for those of you that are unfamiliar, the Wilson Center is the living memorial to President Woodrow Wilson, as he is the only president to have a PhD. And so we're enacted by Congress over 50 years ago in his honor and dedication to policy research. And so we serve as the nation's key nonpartisan forum for policy research and open dialogues. And so for over the past 2 decades, my program, the Environmental Change and Security Program, has examined the complex linkages between environmental change and what could be considered non-traditional security issues, which I'll talk more about today. And so we know that's why we're here, is because environmental and climatic changes are set to fundamentally disrupt every aspect of our lives. They will and are disrupting how we work, our economy, where we live, and how communities and countries fit into the global landscape. And so in line with the themes of the conference, militarism and the violence of climate catastrophe, and this workshop, Environmental Peacebuilding Works, understanding how environmental change, security, and peacebuilding interact is really important. And so as these changes and risk continue to grow, there's an urgent need for global governance and cooperation to steer this much needed transformation. And so with our time today, I'm really looking forward to unpacking how these changes can create avenues for peace and prosperity.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much again, Ms. King. And I guess I have the presentation up right now, so I'll just share it.
Okay, great.
And I'll also be taking notes diligently
Awesome.
during the presentation as well.
Okay, great.
Oh, let me see. Sorry. Wait.
Okay, we can go to the next one, please. Great. So for today, I thought to disseminate the kind of broad topic of environmental peace building into 3 different lenses. So lenses can be considered lenses of decision making, so which each interact in different ways. And so they can provide kind of a framing for how environmental peace building can happen at different levels. So the first is that human dimension or community level. Second is national and regional levels. And then lastly, international governance. So you can go to the next slide, please. And so to start kind of how we can examine environmental changes through a human security lens. So one important part of understanding opportunities for building peace is by examining how climate and environmental changes will impact us and our choices. How do we interact with the resources that are most easily at our disposal? Do we have the ability to have our own water and food? Is it safe, available, affordable? Can we comfortably live where we live? And so overall, access to and control over natural resources can play a major role in conflict and security. And at the same time, the environmental interdependence can be a powerful incentive for cooperation and peace building. And recognizing that conflict potential and having a conflict sensitive lens is really helpful for finding entry points for building peace. And so with our responses to climate impacts, I just want to touch on a few examples, and Donald, I kind of talked to you about it, but like mobility, people move for a number of reasons, and these factors, whether they are political, social, economic, or environmental, all influence people's movements in complex ways. And people's destinations vary. Some move internally, some across borders, but globally, the number of people moving is increasing, and more people are becoming displaced and forced to move for reasons beyond their control. And climate change is one facet of that that's shaping people's decisions about where to move, where to live, and how to plan their future. And so often migration can be seen as a security risk, but it's also a tried and true strategy for dealing with crises. And so for planning for kind of climate related movements and recognizing the different ways in which people move, there's an opportunity for peace building when there's cooperation and forethought used in understanding people's mobility. Another one, gender. Women and girls are hugely important when it comes to addressing climate change, and they're often the ones dealing closest with its consequences. So across our work at the Wilson Center, we really seek to amplify the connections between women's rights and empowerment, and including access to comprehensive reproductive health services and girls' education, and how these can transform lives and societies by unlocking women's potential for managing natural resources, improving livelihoods, and building peace. And another one I'll mention is water and food. They're vital to life. They are essential to the health of individuals, the vitality of communities, and the stability of nations. And so climate is set to impact agriculture deeply. More erratic rainfall, prolonged droughts. This can be very detrimental to societies that are subsistent on agriculture for their economic gains. And since the 90s, there has been a long-held notion that nations will go to war over water. However, that has yet to come to fruition, partially because more often than not, countries or states or local communities are more likely to cooperate over water or shared resources. That doesn't mean that tensions don't exist, but water can be an excellent opportunity for cooperation and peace building. And there are a number of organizations working on cooperation over that shared resource, and whose peace building moves across all skills of decision making. And as you mentioned, if there's time at the end, I'd like to show a short animation that highlights the connections between water, conflict, and peace building. And so when looking at these different aspects, I bring them up because this interdisciplinary cross-sectoral lens can really help practitioners, policymakers, and researchers better understand the connections between these aspects like water and food, and what they mean for stability, economic prosperity, and human well-being. And these are a few, and so many come to mind too, but they really provide entry points for thinking at that personal and community level around environmental peace building and bringing people together over a shared resource. So we can go to the next slide.
Oh,
there we go. And so I'm bringing it to that next level. It's regional and national levels of decision making, can illustrate really well how power imbalances and equity play out. It also shows where pathways exist for tipping scales in a different direction, or examples of where they can or already are more balanced. So climate and environmental changes really lay bare issues of inequity and injustice. And so building in equity and inclusion, challenges and opportunities at the start of any project or research can build better resilience and responses to climate change. And I'm sure with all of your work as peace builders, you're very familiar that often it's systematic changes needed for advancing peace involve that coordination between local communities and governments or regional networks. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And so at the Wilson Center, we have a project that has developed a framework for better improving predictive capabilities for the security risk posed by climate change. And so it asks, what do we need to know to have early warning, to take proactive action on these issues? And so the framework we developed includes different tipping points or entry points, you could say, for vulnerabilities that climate impacts are likely to interact with in ways that compound risk. So one is these physical and natural systems vulnerabilities. Is a place susceptible to hurricanes, to droughts? What are those ecosystemic vulnerabilities going on? Another is transboundary and regional dynamics. So in this regional and national kind of level of decision making, it's how do countries get along with each other? What are those? How do they interact? Then another one, political and social instability. What are those other factors that aren't climate related at all that are going on within a country, but could, if something were to happen, influence climate risk or be exacerbated by climate risk? And then the other one is scales of decision making, which is kind of what we're talking about. It's just like there are all these different levels, and how do decisions at one level influence another, and up here, down there, trickle up and down. And so in recent discussions we've had around lessons learned from this framework and how it can be a tool for understanding, yes, climate risk, but also where there may be entry points for building resilience and better climate responses. A lot of people in our network have reiterated what we've all known for a long time, which is respecting territorial and Indigenous rights and building trust. And so, and I'm sure in your work as peace builders, you know that building trust and those connections take time, but it's really hugely important to getting things done and having action. And so I bring this into the conversation because by having those kind of points identified, you're able to have more coordinated action, and then it can turn into peace building and trust building processes. And so to build trust well, though, stakeholders have to be trustworthy. And so designing interventions to address climate risk should be done collaboratively between people who share similar risk. And so when this doesn't happen, we have what we call backdrafts. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So Backdraft, as countries around the world ramp up efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change, in transitioning to a renewable economy and protecting communities on the front lines of climate change is very critically important. But there is, however, a risk that these well-intentioned efforts could have a backdraft effect, which leads to unintended consequences. So if designed or implemented without consideration for conflict potential, unforeseen negative spillover might damage economic development, undermine political stability, or fray the fabric of communities. And so at the Wilson Center, we have a whole project on this, but we recently co-hosted a panel that discussed climate change, violence, and migration in Central America. And one of the panelists was Miriam Miranda, and she is a Honduran activist who advocates for the human and environmental rights of the Afro-Indigenous Garifuna people, and she is the leader of the Black Organization of Honduras. And so in her community, which is located on the Atlantic coast of Honduras, she said that as a coastal community, they're very vulnerable to the climate crisis, but this vulnerability is compounded by pollution from thermoelectric projects and tourist mega projects. So in her case, climate mitigation efforts are only exacerbating regional injustice and conflict and pushing more people to displacement or migration. And so these type of projects can be really highly contentious in the region too, as it was mentioned that in many cases, local communities don't even can't even access the energy generated by a hydroelectric project in or around their territories. So to address these underlying issues, she calls for governments to shift investments away from an unsustainable growth and instead promote well-being, and to really analyze development projects or efforts and ask who are they serving and to what end. So having more of that critical lens to our climate responses. And so also to allow local territorial actors in Indigenous communities to be in the driver's seat and at a minimum included when it comes to climate change responses and peace building. So I share this because while climate change has become our new normal and there's urgency to respond to it, and you're all working on it in different ways and building peace, there are a number of nuances and perspectives that climate adaptation and mitigation has to take into account. And so while actions can be progressive, they also must consider conflict potential in order to ensure that there is peace when responding to climate change. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And so this brings me to the next level of decision-making, international government. So one international mechanism for addressing climate change that you're all familiar with is the Paris Agreement. So it's a staple of the agreement is countries' efforts to reduce national emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. And since its creation and the continued meeting of the parties, COP, many new actors for climate action have come to the table. There's been a window of opportunity for emissions, think tanks, cities, NGOs, and many more actors that are now driving the work of policymakers, expanding beyond the roles of national level governments in this space. So there's been a shift in its creative pocket for individual, city, and state-led environmental action and partnerships. And so at this level of decision making, there is a question around scale. So how are these decisions being disseminated down to the community levels, and how are the people most affected getting a seat at the table? And we saw at the most recent COP that this is shifting. All eyes now are on who is there, and it's no longer just what country leaders are there. It's people, it's organizations. Attention's more noted towards what sectors are being involved. As I mentioned earlier, there's so many different facets of human security and with environmental changes. So a lot more people are coming to this arena because climate's impacting their sectors and it's all related. And so one example at this level of where environmental and kind of climate peace building and international cooperation exists, and it brings in a geopolitical lens, is the relationship between US and China. So constantly we are barraged with headlines of US-China competition, but we are both high emitters. And out of everything we compete over, climate change actually has the potential to be an important confidence building measure between the two countries. And because no matter what else is happening, there is a chance that they can succeed together. And so the largest emitters also, oh, that's great. There's a topic tomorrow. Perfect. Well, lead in for that. And so the largest emitters and other people involved in these international agreements can really play a role in bringing leaders internationally together to reduce emissions, but also guide the international arena towards opportunities for collaboration and knowledge exchange, whether that's technologies, programming, or international or energy production. And so international agreements, they can, in this fora can provide those opportunities for global collaboration on climate action, but there are also show unlikely and unique partnerships available at every level of decision making for us to find responses and build peace towards addressing climate change and environmental changes. So if we can go to the next slide. And so looking ahead, the goal is to ensure that resilience is built with peace and prosperity in mind. And so globally, there's a preparedness for what's to come. And the importance is that this preparedness and awareness can improve livelihoods and overall outcomes. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And so that is why environmental peace building is such an interesting way to do this. So often conversations are around conflict and scarcity of resources, but really more often than not, people are working together in creating peace. And so environmental peace building as a practice has come onto the scene in the past few decades, and it is an evolving way of governing and managing natural resources and the environment to support sustainable peace. And so more and more, we will see natural resource management and climate adaptation and mitigation as potential tools for peace rather than conflict or security issues. So we can go to the next slide, please. And so I'm just scratching the surface on how environmental peace building works. But one great thing about environmental peace building is that there is an existing broad network of people working on this. There exists the Environmental Peace Building Association. In case any of you are familiar, it is a professional organization and network of actors and stakeholders working in or adjacent to this field. So the association has a large global network. It brings in different communities of practice and different levels of practice. So from lawyers to government actors, young professionals and students to seasoned experts. The association has events, conferences, publications, and interest groups that focus on environmental peace building's connections to, for example, gender, law, data, water, all of that good stuff. And there's also a young professionals group that allows for a peer-to-peer led platform for young professionals or students interested in or working in the field. And so from what we talked about today, environmental peace building spans different levels of decision making, and the people working on it are at all those levels, from the grassroots to the UN and right back down. And so working with them may take an unlikely shape sometimes. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And so I wanted to end with just a few key takeaways from what I've mentioned. I know I've been talking for quite a bit, but just that not all entry points for environmental peace building look the same, and it can take many different forms. So as we saw, people interact with their world in so many different ways that there lies many pathways for peace building that don't directly respond to climate change or addressing environmental changes. And responding to climate change or environmental changes doesn't always mean peace either. So our responses to climate changes aren't always inclusive or peaceful. They can have those unintended spillover effects. And so part of doing environmental peace building well is recognizing that there's potential for being nimble in responses and taking steps to avoid conflict, or at least have an awareness that that tension or those issues could be present. The next one, there's a space for environmental peace building at all levels. As I mentioned, from US, China cooperation over emissions reductions and knowledge exchange, all the way down to better partnerships and peace and trust building at the community level between regional and national actors. There's space everywhere for this to be a part of addressing climate and environmental changes. And so the network of environmental peace building is vast, and it is growing. It's developing so quickly. There was one conference they had in 2019, the first one on environmental peace building. And I think they had about 200 people or so. And then they just hosted one this year, and it was all virtual. And they had, I think, over maybe 5,000 people interested or joining. It's just expanded because so many people, it's just touching so many different places of work at every different level. And it's becoming this very large community of practice of people working on this, or it aligns with their work. And so I end too with working with unlikely partnerships, because it doesn't look one way. There's a lot of people working on this. And there's really opportunities for unique or unlikely interventions or partnerships that can address maybe your goal of building peace either through climate, or there's a lot of different ways to still address your goal, but there might be different partnerships to get there. And they might be topics you may not be familiar with, but have a similar way of making progress. So that's all I have. So thank you for having me and letting me talk more about environmental peace building. I hope it's left you with some new knowledge or any familiar knowledge, things to digest. And I look forward to your questions. I can also show the animation if it might be helpful too, but really, thank you.
Well, Thank you so much, Ms. King, for sharing, your presentation. I learned a lot. I think like for me, like one point that really I found really insightful was the fact that just because you're trying to mitigate climate change does not mean you're doing so in an equitable way and in a way that enhances peace.
Yeah.
So yeah, the idea of that woman from Honduras who was saying how, she didn't like her community didn't even have access to the energy that was generated. That is, really worrisome. But I think the fact that the interest in environmental peace building is growing is really optimistic. Um,
Yeah, it's very hopeful. That's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, no, for sure. I don't know, like if you want to send me the animation, I can screen share it. If anyone has any immediate questions, though, we can also do a Q&A.
Yeah.
However you guys want to do this.
Do you have any explicit examples where this worked? Countries or projects or things like that?
Yeah, there's quite a bit. One country, and I almost added it, but one location that really touches on all of this is Pacific Island countries. They are really heavily at risk of climate change. There's a lot of mobility, like all of those different factors that I mentioned that are going to be impacted by climate change. They're experiencing them right now, but they also have different changes. There's a lot of geostrategic competition going on in the area, in the region with China and the US. There's so much traditional and indigenous knowledge that's at risk too, should these things happen. And there's a lot of sovereignty questions that if something may happen, what happens with this migration or this potential things happening. Specific, I know it's because where I work, we work with the people that are doing the intervention. So I'm really able to share like a broader perspective, but we work really closely with USAID and they have a lot of interventions on peace building, but they're also grappling with that issue too, where it's like they're trying to do development, but is it equitable and is it just, and is it causing more harm than good? And so we're working with them too. Another aspect I didn't mention is minerals, and it's a little broader, but there's going to be a lot of competition over critical minerals, but there's also going to need to be a lot of cooperation between states and communities, local communities. It's at every level on extracting these. So that's something to look out for as we continue with moving also to a renewable energy and more climate change responses. Yeah, I'm trying to think of specific projects because a lot of what we have focus on are like USAID projects, and they work in local communities through there. And I mean, we do have a lot of local actors, like we mentioned Miriam Miranda, and that is her work, is defending her land and her livelihood. So it's interesting. But yeah, I would like to hear from you all too, more about your work and any helpful resources maybe I can provide given what I know. Veterans for Peace, I'm not sure. We've done a bit on veterans because the Wilson Center has a broad US like international perspective, and we've done quite a bit with veterans, but that would be an interesting partner.
I know like another idea I have is regarding the Millennium Project. Yeah, I don't know. Have you heard of the Millennium Project? Oh, nice. Okay, yeah. So well, I'm currently interning there. But the speaker for the Green Diplomacy with China workshop, he is actually the executive director of the Millennium Project.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and some of their projects like focus on environmental security, stuff like that. So yeah, that could be like and it's also based in DC, you know, so it could be an interesting partnership between the Wilson
Yeah.
Center and the Millennium Project.
Yeah, we're always looking for good partnerships and
Yeah.
elevating these issues too. Definitely.
I did have a question actually. So regarding you mentioned you know, Indigenous knowledge as being an important a vital thing, you know, that all of us must take into consideration when pushing for equity, when addressing the climate crisis. How do you think, this is probably not the best articulated question, but how do you think Indigenous knowledge, like I guess, should be like integrated into the mainstream? I mean, actually, I'm thinking about it as I speak. Maybe, you know, obviously placing, making sure that Indigenous activists lead the effort in addressing the climate crisis. But possibly that's one way to really like take into account and make sure Indigenous knowledge and perspectives are not overlooked and are, you know, prioritized in this effort. I guess just like any other ideas you have.
Yeah, and we had an event, and again, what we do is events, and we act as a bridge between the peace builders and the people working on it, and allow them to connect with policymakers in the DC policy space. And so we had an event in November on how to better incorporate Indigenous knowledge, and I do, and kind of talking about that international arena, it is really shifting. And we can tell, I think, with Trump, when he pulled out of the Paris Agreement and created this vacuum for people to take action into their own hands, and it allowed for a more inclusive international space where you do have more Indigenous leaders working closer with either city level or state level, and even US government. When we had that panel, we worked with the Department of the Interior, which I think is really making big changes around inclusive models for having Indigenous knowledge lead with adapting to climate responses. And so I have seen that shift even since just starting like working in this space. And so I do see it changing. I mean, there is issues too though, and especially in like Central American or Latin American countries, of environmental defenders being targeted for standing up. And I mean, it happens in a lot of places as well. And so it is an issue and really detrimental that people are trying to, and that's what Mary Miranda mentioned too. She's like, we are being killed because I'm trying to defend my land, my livelihood. And she's like, and I'm being a victim of it because the resistance that is being there. So I'm not sure on like interventions exactly, but I think awareness and connecting those spaces and allowing platforms to share those stories too are really important ways of getting some thing to happen, or at least recognizing it.
Definitely. Yeah, you make great points. Cindy, Miss Peister, I know you have a question, so
Yeah.
oh, you're muted.
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted. Oh, we can't hear you. Wait, let me see. I just asked you to unmute. Oh yeah.
Good.
Cool.
Oh, there we go. Oh no, I can't hear anything.
Ms. Peister, is your volume turned up? We still can't hear you. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No audio.
If you want to maybe drop the question in the chat. I know you dropped like a resource in the chat that we should all check out.
Yeah. And I saw Carolyn, you unmuted too, if you have a question as well or a comment. I'm open. This is fun to discuss.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that because you were sort of asking what we're up to.
Yeah.
So, and the slide that grabbed my attention was the balance between regional and national power, because in the state of Illinois, legislation was passed in September to close down all of the coal power plants, except for the ones that are owned or operated by municipal electricity groups. And they were left out of the legislation, with Naperville City being the largest contributor to coal-fired electricity use. And so I'm actively working right now on trying to get Naperville residents to be aware of the issue. And even going to a township meeting, they were like passing the buck back up to the state and federal level. And so there is this like, who's going to take responsibility? And it is really kind of, I'm realizing as I'm working on it that we have to also be able to say to local areas that they have as much responsibility for navigating this issue as the state and federal levels do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's a challenge to communicate that to people, and it's one I'm experiencing firsthand. But I don't know if you have any tips or recommendations about that. How to create, local interest that they can make a difference.
No, and that's so hard, and I only know from kind of broader perspectives, but I can't say like storytelling, that's one big way. I think one thing I've learned too is like the human experience, like reconnecting back with what does this mean for my health? This is what this means for your health, your livelihood, your life in general. And also it is that trust too. It comes up in all of our conversations whenever we bring people of the different levels together. They're like, if you don't trust the government, you're not going to want to do much, or you do trust them, and then they might do something that just ruins it completely. And so it's like having those partnerships is hugely important. But I know we have a blog at the Wilson Center, and we're non-advocacy, nonpartisan. We're really just like, here are what people are telling us as strategies to do this, but those really come up a lot. And I think storytelling and effective ways that show just exactly what's happening have a lot of weight often too. I don't know if that's helpful, but some things
no, that is helpful. That's an angle I haven't tried yet, so thank you. I've seen it used, but I haven't thought to use it myself. So
yeah, it's been pretty effective with reaching newer audiences that might not. And there might be other unlikely people, within the community, that unlikely partnerships within the community that it might affect them, and people might just not know it. But it's up to you, unfortunately, to figure it out and where they are. It's a lot. It's like a thankless work everyone is doing, that's for sure.
No, that's helpful though. Thank you. That got my mind to thinking about going to local hospitals or groups that treat COPD or asthma, like lung issues, and the level that Prairie State is having on people's lung health.
Oh,
yeah,
that's awesome. When it away from my job too, like being an Illinois resident and knowing that there's people working on this and like trying to navigate that, it's just really nice to hear. So thank you for bringing it up. It makes me excited. And Cindy, were you able to figure out your audio? Maybe.
Hey, Cindy? Good.
Oh no, it's still not working.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's.
Oh wait, maybe there were.
Well, one thing you can do is you can unmute, you can mute and unmute, and you might be able to hear you after. I know sometimes I do that at the start of Zoom meetings when people can't hear me. If you want to give it a shot.
Oh, it looks like she's.
Oh, it
frozen.
Yeah, it might be an internet connection thing. Oh, you're unfrozen. Do you want to give it a shot again? Or? Yeah.
No, it's still not working. I'm gonna put some links in the chat just of what we do a little bit in case the resources are helpful or anything. Just a little bit more about our work, and maybe there's some things in there that might spark some inspiration or might be interesting and dealing with all these different topics and what you guys are all grappling with.
Definitely. I was actually just gonna ask you to drop the links. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, so let's see. Oh, perfect. And then do you have, you said that the environmental peace and security program at the Wilson Center?
Oh, yeah. So I put our blog in case there's like information. There's a lot of different resources, and there also is some on storytelling and the power of utilizing the media to kind of get to talk about these things and the deep interconnectedness of, you know, if you're talking about pollution, there's so many other factors that go into just that one aspect of like environmental damage. And so there's a lot on our blog, New Security Beat, and then a link to our program. And then I'll also put a link to the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. It might be of interest just to check out. I led the young professionals group for a while. So if you know of students or even anyone can join too, it's a really fascinating network of people working on at every different level, either local. Oh, and another one too, kind of with that international climate action too. And it kind of relates to maybe what you're all working on is another unlikely partnership is places around the world that are experiencing what you're experiencing too, or your community is experiencing. You have shared risk in finding those people and trying to identify maybe partnerships there and like knowledge exchange. Like there might, I don't know, I know coastal cities or cities with pollution, there's others around the world that are trying to face these same issues too. And so there could be really interesting partnerships that come away from that and working with them. And like Peoria, we have a sister city, and I'm sure, I think every city usually does, but it's a really interesting way to have that global connectedness over a shared risk and what people are facing. So just another idea.
Yeah, definitely. So like connecting with grassroots with activists working at the local level, especially those in the coastal cities and other kind of climate sensitive areas.
Yeah, like there's a lot to learn. Like Alaska and certain communities in Africa are facing similar issues. Europe is facing a lot of like what cities are facing as well. So there's just a lot, there's a lot more similarities to be found than differences, and a lot of opportunities for that. That's a whole part of peace building, right? Like there's more opportunities for building partnerships than not. They just might not look a certain way is all I really have come to learn.
Oh, exactly. Well, and also I wanted to ask, so just let you guys know the breakout room is closing in 30 seconds. So I guess I won't ask the question I was gonna ask.
Okay.
Cindy,
Well,
I'm really sorry for technical difficulties.
Yeah, and I'm happy to follow up over email or any questions or be in touch. So please, my email's in the chat. So please do send me a note, however I can help or be informative, and I really hope today was helped or got some nuggets going of